Welcome to a new episode of Becoming a Post-Growth Planner, Obstacles and Challenges to Changing Roles and Practices. My name is Christian Lamker, Assistant Professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And for this episode, we're recording at the beginning of 2025. I have the honor to welcome Izabela Mironowicz here from Poland, who will take us into post-socialist contexts. We will learn more about what this term means as well. Post-war housing estates and her wide experiences in Poland, Germany, and other parts of Europe.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's very good to be here. I have to mention that my students have this podcast on their reading list. So I'm a university professor at Gdańsk University of Technology in Poland. My research interests lie in the area of urban transformation. More recently, my research has focused on the challenges and opportunities associated with the transition from pro-growth to degrowth, territorial organization of society. So how can cities, these engines of growth, function under such conditions? How should they be planned and governed? What kind of society can live in them? Of course, changing cities have strong links to the planning system. So this is also the area of interest for me. And I want to mention that since graduating, I have been working as urban planner alongside my academic work. So I have also a professional experience with governments, with NGOs, with companies on advising on urban issues, drafting a plan. So I believe that you can't fully understand the transformation of cities and planning if you just look at them from a distance. So it's not just enough that you believe, you have to practice too. And in addition to my work, I am an advocate and a supporter of bone marrow donation.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a long talk in Paris at the ESOP Annual Congress 2024, Association of European Schools of Planning in Paris, about degrowth, post-growth planning, but also your directions in research in Poland, Germany, and more specific projects that you did. Also in activism around post-war housing estates. What would you say? How do you experience this with local activism and seemingly hopeless situations? I think I remember this term, lead to an interest in post-growth and degrowth? And also, where do you position yourself in this quite wide debate and spectrum around degrowth and post-growth?
Yeah, thank you. Let me answer the second question first, and then I will arrive to the first one. So I have a tendency to take a radical position. So if you ask me where I fall in on the spectrum of the post-growth positions today, it will, of course, be a radical degrowth position, right? There are several reasons for this, apart from my personal predilection for this radicalism, so to speak. So first, it is that we don't have time, right? In the 1960s and 70s, when the growth debate was particularly vibrant in Europe, we had time to choose between the paths to the future. Today, more and more paths are becoming inaccessible. Secondly, realistically, we are running out of resources, including access to energy in particular, if we don't stop using this energy as foolishly as we are now, for example, for electric scooters in Europe's affluent cities, right? We will run out of those resources for what really matters, right? But this is the second reason. The third one is that we see now a naked and ugly power structure. Your other guest was talked about this too. So what we used to think as of democracy in Europe, so-called representative democracy, right, is actually turning out to be an oligarchy. Right? 2 millennia ago, Aristotle was right about the nature of representative democracy. And this oligarchy tends to call us, the people, human beings, citizens, consumers, right? This is how the oligarchy sees us. What we collectively think, believe, or dream doesn't count. What counts is how much we buy. So we have to stop this actually to regain our humanity, I think. And probably the last point in this position is not the last, but the last I want to mention for now. It's the biological and physical nature of ourselves, right? The world around us, and the complexity of this world. We are a little bit deluded by technology that we can do everything. Well, can we print water on 3D printers? Apparently not. If we run out of insects, we won't survive because insects process dead organic matter. No, no Mad Max is dystopian enough to imagine the end of the world for a lack of insects, right? So we need to stop this distraction too. And now I will get back to the first question. It will be not super straightforward, but I will try to match. So 10 years ago, we were conducting a research for one of the Polish cities on how to build a governance model that empowers citizens and share responsibility with local communities. And the idea was to propose a territorial governance model for a large city. And by we, I mean a group of researchers from different disciplines, activists, urban planners, all represented by the local NGO, which works on the daily basis on urban regeneration. And I had the privilege of coordinating this research. Look, this was not a university, that was an NGO running a research. And it was actually the first time for me that I had done a study that used a fully participatory approach, working with citizen science rather than using it. Right? That was very important for this my pathway towards transformation. And towards transformation, towards degrowth, right? And two things from this study were important. First, the more democratic you work, the more interesting and unexpected results you get. And the second was about so-called large housing estates, right? I mean large housing estates built as a part of mass housing programs after the Second World War. And these estates turned out to be places where citizens' activism in a variety of forms was significantly higher than in other urban structures, because we looked at the real urban structures, right? So it was super interesting. And as it happened, shortly afterwards, I joined the project at the Technical University of Dortmund that was specifically concerned with the value of the post-war architecture and urban planning. And I coordinated the group of international researchers. And actually, it was clear that there is something interesting at this heritage. And that was actually a large housing estate. So this is something which led me to the closer look into this structure. We'll probably get back to it. And my PhD student, Adrian Porata, did a tremendous work to specifically look at these estates in 3 European countries: former East Germany, Poland, and Czechia.
Yeah, so I would say let's take a jump a bit more into the post-socialist context and large-scale housing estates. And I think it's also a wonderful framing that I remember from discussions between some signs of hopelessness, need for radical change, but on the other side also signs of hope, positive narratives, and new imaginaries emerging from using degrowth, citizen involvement, and such issues. And I found it quite fascinating from my position with less experience in Eastern Europe, the post-socialist context, or let's say the so-called post-socialist context, and how this influences thoughts, especially about what you just explained, private and versus collective action, property, citizens versus consumers, but also the potential of planning as a means of positive change in that. With your experiences in the projects, narratives about large-scale housing estates change over time. And I understand that in your research, you also question prevailing, usually negative assumptions about large-scale housing estates.
I have some thoughts about this, and I'm using. I'm trying to find this positive narrative because it helps people to imagine how it could look. Right. This is the issue. And sometimes I use the quote from George Monbiot about private sufficiency and public luxury, and sometimes I refer to Nate Hagens, who runs an excellent podcast, Great Simplification, and he at the end of his conversation he typically asks his guest the question, "What do you care about most in the world?" Right? And nobody answers my posh car or my house or my Caribbean holiday, right? Everybody answers about loved ones, about nature, about beauty, about peace, right? And these are actually the values that degrowth demands, right? So when we think of degrowth cities, we think of conviviality, companionship, friendship, sharing, caring. We think actually of abundance, not limitations. That's an important issue. So we think of places where we can find what we care about most, right? That sounds nice, but the next question is like, okay, and what exactly it's supposed to look like? And this is why these descriptions from George Monbiot are so helpful, right? That if we see public luxury and private sufficiency, it's something that appeals to our imagination, at least for planners' imagination, right? And if you think actually that this might be not super attractive, like it wouldn't appeal to the people's imagination, I do not agree. Probably every listener can browse Elt Arla housing estate in Vienna, right? A big housing with swimming pools on the roof, and probably many people in the world would love to live in such conditions, right? With this shared swimming pool on the roof and beautiful view of the city of Vienna in the modest but functional apartments and generous green spaces and sport facilities in the estate owned by the city of Vienna. And this is also important. And the situation in Poland in this respect is particularly instructive, because since the beginning of transformation 30 years ago, housing has been entirely in private developers' hands, right? Public subsidies included only subsidizing housing mortgages. In other words, banks and developers have made money, right? And now, even in the liberal mainstream narrative, is that the housing is a right, not a commodity. 10 years ago, it wouldn't be possible. You would be a witch. And this actually brings me to this large housing estates, because this is the example where we can actually share this imagination, right? These housing estates were built with massive public subsidies everywhere in Europe, not only in the communist, post-communist parts, so-called. In the conditions of acute housing shortage, after a brutal war, exhaust society, right? But what we actually have to acknowledge are efficiency of these programs, right? They were really super efficient. They were saving limited resources, right? They were finding an optimum density. And this density actually provided all the goods or the services you need. Right? There were kindergartens, there were schools, there were green areas. Actually, everything was there what you need. No excess, but nothing really missing. And I see we're running out of time, but I want to emphasize the urban form, because it's super important that this form encourages sharing and togetherness. It's a layout in which it's difficult to extract private, because the space is designed for sharing and commoning, right? So it's like something which discourages use of private cars, but facilitate walking and biking instead, right? So I would say, do we really need to keep looking for 15-minute city model? No, we have it, right? Only we have to look at it differently. And to conclude about this negative narratives, well, I think that the intense critique within the neoliberal narrative stems from the fact that these estates were not designed for the individual consumer, but instead for the responsible and emphatic member of the community, right? This is why they are so bad for them.
Yeah, so I understand we can actually learn a lot for degrowth and post-growth and planning from looking at massive post-war housing programs and also maybe doing more research, taking a more open perspective on what they have actually done and what they also tell us for the future. But looking from that a bit more broadly at existing planning instruments, ideas that are around us, where do you see more specific opportunities for action for practicing planners today that they could take up, that they could nurture? Do you have advice for planners today dealing with post-war housing estates, or also other questions that are around in the cities as we have them today, as we've built them over decades or centuries?
Of course, looking at good examples is important, and you can learn from them and you can apply what you have learned into your practice. But I think equally important is to realize that we probably won't be able very quickly to change the entire system, right? So I do not expect, and you probably don't either, that the liberal governments across Europe will suddenly adopt the degrowth agenda and introduce value blocking mechanism into planning, right? This is not pro-growth machinery. But we can, as we have done for centuries, reinterpret the law, right? Interpret it anew, apply to present realities. Giuseppe Micciarelli, right? In one of the chapters of the book Post-Growth Planning, calls such interpretations hacking the legal. I like it a lot, because I will give you an example from Polish side, probably then it's clear for everyone. Article 1 of Polish Planning Act states that the basic principle that must underpin the formulation of spatial policy plans, blah, 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 are spatial order and sustainable development. Well, sustainable development has a clear legal definition, not that we have 100 definitions in the books, but legal definition in Environmental Protection Act. And this definition is super good. They didn't think about this linkage, but this definition says that we have to maintain the natural balance and continuity of basic natural processes. Well, this is very good for us, because we as citizens we can actually complain to the court about any legal act, right? And plan, for example, is a legal act. So we can actually start challenging these plans. And you can say, well, okay, the courts would not be judging as we wish. Well, I will give you a very short example. Recently in Poland, the court considered the blocking of the bridge and the entrance to Taylor Swift concert in Warsaw as civil disobedience, and handed down the lower possible punishment for the organizers of this blockage, right? And in the reasoning, the court acknowledged the seriousness of climate crisis, including the recent floods across Poland. And they said precisely that perhaps in the future, the present defendants will become heroes. So it's changing. It's not the court said once and it will never happen. And it will never change, right? So my point here is we have to hack the legal, right?
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with that there are these different ways of thinking about another system, but also taking hope in what we can do today and tomorrow, and then also to get there. In a short intermediate sentence, maybe we have touched upon the question of what are actually post-socialist countries or the post-socialist context, and you have some critical thoughts for that that I would like you to share with us.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I don't like the expression post-socialist countries and especially post-socialist cities, because simply it's misleading. First, notice that we use this term post-socialist countries only for the European countries, right? Not for Vietnam or for Cuba, right? And this annoys me because the system that existed in these countries was certainly not socialist. It was an authoritarian regime, an oligarchy that depended on the Soviet Union. This oligarchy had a power over resources. Formally, all the resources belonged to the state, but only this oligarchy could control them. So that was not a social nature of the resources, right? So this oligarchy repressed the opposition, including working class, right? They were shooting workers. So is this what socialism looked like? No, this is what an authoritarian system looks like, right? So this is why I don't like to associate the term socialism with the system. Look at China today. Is it a communist state? I mean, okay, the elite is called Chinese Communist Party, but it's not communist state, right? And it's even more complicated if it comes to the cities, because let me question, what is a socialist city? Krakow with 1,000 years of history and only 50 in this authoritarian regime, right? Did it change the nature of the city, the structure of the city? Or Prague, right? Even all that. So is Prague more like Havana, or is Prague more like Vienna, right? So it doesn't describe the reality properly. And there is excellent writing of Sonja Hirt on this. So I very much agree with this. And the last point in this reasoning is, okay, when city stops become post-socialist, where it ends. I mean, because it assumes that there is only one path, which is a capitalist city, surely, right? Of course, it's like there is no alternative. This is what the neoliberal narrative was telling us. So this is why I'm trying not to use this term, because it doesn't tell us much about the cities and even the countries, right? But especially cities. I will provide a link for these arguments by Sonja Hirt. I think everyone would enjoy it. Thank you for this question.
Yeah, we got to know each other in European debates, crossing beyond context. On the other side, planning often has the danger of also getting lost, highlighting differences, context-specific factors, and then maybe not moving further in the wider cross-national or systemic questions, not scaling up questions like degrowth or post-growth. And in that regard, you are or have been very active around education as well in the ESOP network. And in Paris last year, you also hosted a roundtable on education and other questions of post-growth and degrowth together with Federico Savini. Maybe for a very short, very few minutes, you can take us into the core thoughts and discussions that came up about education in this context, education of students, but maybe also education of activists or professionals.
Yeah, thank you for asking this, because it was really interesting discussion, and there was Federico and Andrea Frank from Birmingham, Peter Schmidt from Stockholm, Zeynep Enlil from Istanbul, and Ceren Varis Husar from Bratislava. The very important observation was by Ceren, who is a young academic, and she pointed out something that the older generation did not any attention to. She asked how we can teach students post-growth approach when universities themselves are growth machines, right? They demand a huge amount of work from academics. They're supposed to teach students innovatively, do a groundbreaking research, publish a lot, work on the social environment, work with business. What else, right? So it might be an interesting topic for your podcast by its own. But back to the story. Federico pointed out that we need to start showing the whole process of so-called urban development while teaching students. So in all its complexity, so from slave labor of children in the lithium mines to the energy required for supply chains and the production of building materials, right? And to the dumps of Africa. So not just what is happening now and what we see here, but what had to be done before and what will happen afterwards. I think it's an excellent idea, because we see on the nice face of so-called development. And the panelists also pointed out the link between post-growth, degrowth issue and environmental issues. That's obvious. And this could be a step for a post-growth agenda in the education of urban planners. Social sciences were also clearly highlighted. Andrea, who coordinated the team developing the ESOP core curriculum, mentioned that actually we need even more determination to use platforms like ESOP to promote a post-growth agenda, given the different bureaucratic constraints exist on programs exist in each country, right? So that was really interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, we often talk about students in education and somehow think of, okay, that's the only point of education happening, and afterwards people go to practice. But on the other side, I think you also have some questions or ideas of what does education mean in terms of activists from several sides, also of practitioners that are already in the work field. How do you see potentials for improving education also beyond study programs, bachelor, master themselves, and saying for people at the age until the age of 30 or 35 or so?
Or 50 or 60, right? I think those of us who can should spend time educating organizations and urban activists, not only planners. Planners too, but the broader public, so to speak. Because these organizations and these urban activists, they can act, they are determined to achieve their goals, but they need help because the planning system is so bloody complicated everywhere, right? So I can give you my own example. In the last 4 months, I have written a series of texts for those who are not urban planners, and I have done so that they know now how to hack the legal, right? How to use it, where the traps are, and I have tried to show them what tools they have and how to use them. So, and the texts were published in Polish Tygodnik Spraw Obywatelskich. I can translate it into Civil Affairs Weekly, which makes them freely available, no paywall, nothing like this. The publisher is, of course, an NGO, right? Surely. And the people that helped me with text to simplify, and so I'm very grateful for that. Now, a lot of people come to me with a specific, very detailed questions, but they usually know better what to do, right? They have better arguments in discussion with local authorities or members of parliaments or authorities. So my general answer is the education, we have to do it to empower people, to empower a broader society. If we are to win any future, it will be through real democratization. This is why we need to spend the time for doing this rather than writing yet another paper. Yes, papers are super important, but this work really does matter, right?
Thank you. Yeah, we'll also put the links to the description of this episode later for those who can't speak Polish or try to use the translation tool. Then it gives a bit of access also to your thoughts in this dimension, which I also believe is crucially important. And I think also the podcast is a mean to reach out in a different way, some part to the same audience, but also to another audience maybe that is not that accessible by regular academic papers and academic roundtables. This means we are already moving towards the end of half an hour or so of conversation. And in the podcast, we end each episode with just one sentence where I ask each participant to finish with a kind of definition or idea for the future also of post-growth or degrowth and planning. And in the same way, I now ask you to finish the sentence. Post-growth planning is.
Obviously, I knew this question because I'm a follower of the podcast. And I will use the term of Markus Herdorfer, the president of ECTPCU, which is an organization of practicing planners in Europe, because it fits perfectly here. Post-growth planning is planning for nature, taking into account needs of humans. And this is opposite to what we are doing now, which is planning for humans, taking into account the needs of the nature.
Izabela, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts with us, with the whole audience over the last roughly 30 minutes. Thanks for joining from Poland to sharing insights to a wider audience by joining this podcast. And I'm also already looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.